Why does every evening start with good intentions and end exactly the same? Why do you spend all day thinking about what you're going to do after work and then do none of it? You know this moment. It's 4:37 p.m. Maybe you're still sitting at your desk. Maybe you're in your car. Maybe you're finishing the last email of the day. And for a second, you feel hopeful because tonight feels different. Tonight, you're finally going to go to the gym. Tonight, you're finally going to work on that side project. Tonight, you're finally going to clean your apartment, call your parents, read that book, apply for that job, fix your sleep schedule, start eating better, get your life together. And for a few minutes, you actually believe it. You imagine the version of yourself that follows through, the disciplined version, the productive version, the version that's been living in your head for years. Then something happens. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. The workday ends. You drive home. You walk through the door. You put your keys down. And somehow, everything changes. The motivation disappears. The urgency disappears. The plan disappears. And the next thing you know, you're sitting on your couch, phone in your hand, scrolling again. Not because you decided to, not because that's what you wanted, but because that's what always happens. And that's the part nobody talks about. Most people think their life is defined by big decisions, career choices, relationships, moving cities, starting businesses. But most lives are actually shaped by something much smaller, what you do between 6 p.m. and midnight, because that's where your future lives, not during work, not during meetings, not while answering emails. Those hours belong to someone else. Your evenings belong to you. And what you repeatedly do with those hours becomes your life. That's why this hurts, because deep down, you already know. You know the problem isn't that you don't have goals. You have goals, lots of them. The problem is that your evenings keep killing them. Look at last week. How many times did you tell yourself, I'll do it tonight? How many times? And how many times did tonight become another night? Because that's the cycle nobody tracks. You wake up, go to work, get through the day, come home, waste the evening, feel guilty, go to sleep, promise tomorrow will be different, repeat. Day after day, week after week, year after year. And the scary part? It feels normal. You don't notice it happening because it doesn't feel dramatic. You're not making terrible decisions. You're not ruining your life overnight. You're just slowly drifting, one evening at a time. And that's why it's dangerous, because obvious problems get fixed. Silent problems become lifestyles. Think about what your evening actually looks like, not what you tell yourself it looks like, what it really looks like. You get home, maybe you kick off your shoes, maybe you microwave something, maybe you order takeout because you're too tired to cook. You sit down for a minute, and then the evening disappears. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Netflix. A little scrolling, a little snacking, a little more scrolling. One episode, then another, and suddenly it's 10:48 p.m.
And you haven't done a single thing you planned. Not one. The workout? Tomorrow. The book? Tomorrow. The budget? Tomorrow. The side business? Tomorrow. Everything important gets pushed into a future that never arrives. And every evening becomes a waiting room, waiting to become the person you said you'd be, but never actually becoming them. What's strange is that most people think they're lazy, but that's not really what's happening. You're not lazy at 10 a.m. You're not lazy when your boss gives you a deadline. You're not lazy when someone else needs something from you. You show up, you perform, you get things done. So why does everything fall apart at night? Because this isn't laziness, it's depletion. Your brain has been making decisions all day, responding, switching tasks, managing stress, managing people, managing expectations. By the time evening arrives, you're mentally exhausted. And exhausted brains don't chase long-term goals. They chase relief. That's why you don't come home craving discipline. You come home craving comfort. And comfort always wins in the short term. Because comfort is immediate. Growth is delayed. Comfort says, sit down. Growth says, keep going. Comfort says, you deserve a break. Growth says, you still have work to do. Comfort feels good now. Growth pays later. And your brain is designed to prefer now. That's why you keep choosing the easier option. Not because you're weak, because you're human. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Human nature explains the behavior. It doesn't excuse it. Because eventually, the evenings become your identity, not your intentions, your actions. Think about how many versions of yourself you've imagined. The fit version, the successful version, the confident version, the focused version, the disciplined version. Now think about how many evenings you've spent becoming that person. Not thinking about becoming them, actually becoming them. That's the gap. And that gap is where most people spend their entire lives. Not failing, not succeeding. Just existing between potential and reality. Always almost changing. Always almost starting. Always almost becoming. And every evening becomes another vote for the person you already are. Because identity isn't built by what you want. Identity is built by what you repeatedly do. You don't become disciplined by wanting discipline. You become disciplined by acting disciplined. Repeatedly. Especially when you don't feel like it. And that's exactly what makes evenings so important. Because evenings are where feelings take over. The structure is gone. The boss is gone. The schedule is gone. Nobody's watching. Nobody cares what you do. Which means the real you shows up. Not the version at work. Not the version in public. The version that's alone. The version making decisions when nobody is forcing them. And that version is usually running on autopilot. That's why the same evening keeps repeating. Because you're not consciously choosing it anymore. You're reenacting it, like a script. Drive home, sit down, open phone, scroll, snack, watch, sleep, regret, repeat. And every repetition strengthens the habit. Not just behaviorally, neurologically. Because your brain learns patterns, and it loves efficiency. The more often you repeat something, the less energy it takes to do it. Which means every evening becomes easier to repeat and harder to escape. That's why changing feels so difficult. You're not fighting one habit. You're fighting hundreds of evenings that came before it. You're fighting momentum. And momentum is powerful because it doesn't care what you planned. It only cares what you've practiced.
Why do weekends never fix the problem? Because that's the promise you keep making. Once the weekend comes, I'll reset. You tell yourself Friday will be different, Saturday will be productive, Sunday will get your life back on track. But then Saturday arrives, and something strange happens. The freedom you've been waiting for all week doesn't create action, it creates drift. You wake up without an alarm, check your phone, stay in bed longer than you planned, one video becomes 10, 1 hour becomes 3, and suddenly it's afternoon. Again. You spent the entire work week wanting more free time. Now you have it, and you don't know what to do with it. Because the real problem was never time. The real problem was structure. Work gave you structure. Your weekends don't. And most people mistake freedom for progress. But freedom without direction usually becomes distraction. That's why so many weekends end with the same thought. Where did the day go? The same question. The same disappointment, the same promise to start Monday. And Monday becomes the new version of Saturday. Again, again, again. The cycle continues. Why does the gym always seem easier in your imagination than in reality? Because your brain loves the reward but hates the process. You don't imagine the workout, you imagine the result, the confidence, the energy, the body, the identity. That's what feels exciting. But when evening comes, the actual workout appears. The drive there, the effort, the discomfort, the sweat, the resistance. And suddenly, scrolling feels easier because scrolling gives you a reward without requiring effort. The gym demands effort before reward. Your phone gives reward before effort. Guess which one your brain prefers after a stressful day? This is why motivation keeps failing you. Motivation is emotional, and emotions change. The version of you at 7 a.m. wants growth. The version of you at 7 p.m. wants relief. Those are two different people, and every evening becomes a battle between them. One wants the future, one wants comfort. Comfort usually wins, because comfort is standing right in front of you. The future isn't. Why do some text messages feel impossible to answer? You know the messages. The one from your friend, the one from your family, the one from someone you actually care about. You read it, you think about replying, you even know what you're going to say, but you don't respond. Not yet. Later. Then later becomes tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes next week. And now it feels awkward, because the longer you wait, the heavier it gets. What's strange is that replying takes less than a minute, but emotionally, it feels enormous, because it's not the message you're avoiding, it's the responsibility, the connection, the emotional energy. And your evenings are already running on empty, so you postpone it, just like everything else. Not because you don't care, because you're depleted. And that's how relationships quietly weaken, not through conflict, through neglect. Small delays, small postponements, small moments of avoidance repeated over months and years. The same pattern that affects your goals affects your relationships. Avoid now, pay later. Why does food become such a big part of evenings? Because food isn't just food, it's relief. You've had a stressful day, you're tired, you're mentally drained, and your brain wants comfort, fast comfort, cheap comfort, predictable comfort. That's why the idea of cooking feels exhausting, even if you know it's better, even if you plan to, even if groceries are already sitting in your fridge. Because after a long day, your brain isn't asking, what's best for me? It's asking, what's easiest? And food delivery answers that question instantly. A few taps, a little anticipation, a dopamine hit before the food even arrives. Then you eat, watch something, scroll a little more, and the evening disappears. Again. Why does loneliness feel louder at night? Because distractions get quieter. During the day, there's movement, people, tasks, notifications, meetings, conversations, things to focus on. But evenings remove the noise, and when the noise disappears, you hear yourself. You notice the empty apartment, the unanswered texts, the relationship that ended, the connection you wish you had, the things you've been avoiding. That's why so many people don't actually scroll for entertainment. They scroll for anesthesia, to numb the feeling, to avoid sitting with themselves. Because sitting alone with your thoughts can feel uncomfortable, especially when those thoughts keep asking questions you don't want to answer.
Questions like, are you happy? Are you where you thought you'd be by now? Why haven't you started? What are you waiting for? Those questions don't disappear. You just temporarily drown them out. That's what the scrolling is doing, not solving, silencing. And every evening becomes another attempt to avoid hearing yourself think. Why do you keep believing tomorrow will be different? Because hope is comfortable. Hope allows you to postpone responsibility. Hope says, you'll figure it out later. You'll start next week. You'll become disciplined eventually. Hope feels productive, but often it isn't. Because hope without action becomes fantasy. And fantasies are dangerous because they feel like progress. You imagine the future version of yourself, the successful version, the healthy version, the focused version, and for a moment, it feels real. Then you close the app, look around, and nothing changed. Because imagination can create the feeling of movement without actual movement. That's why so many people spend years feeling close to change without ever changing. Because they keep consuming motivation instead of building systems. They keep imagining action instead of taking it. And the evenings become the place where those fantasies live, a place where you think about improving your life instead of improving it. And there's a huge difference between those two things. Why does it feel like your life isn't moving, even though you're busy all the time? Because movement and progress are not the same thing. You're moving every day, driving, working, replying, attending meetings, paying bills, running errands, checking notifications, crossing things off lists. From the outside, it looks like a life. It looks productive. It looks normal. But deep down, you know something is missing. Because being busy isn't the same as building something. And that's the trap. You can spend an entire year in motion without getting any closer to the life you actually want. That's why evenings matter so much, because evenings reveal the difference. During the day, you're reacting. At night, you're choosing. Or at least you think you are. Because most evenings aren't choices anymore. They're habits. Automatic behaviors running on repeat. The same couch, the same apps, the same snacks, the same shows, the same thoughts, the same promises. Over and over. And every repetition teaches your brain something. Not just what to do, who you are. That's the part most people miss. Behavior becomes identity, slowly, quietly, without permission. You don't wake up one day and decide, I'm someone who never follows through. You become that person gradually, one postponed evening at a time, one broken promise at a time, one I'll do it tomorrow at a time, until eventually your own words stop meaning anything. And that's where things start getting dangerous. Because once you stop trusting yourself, everything gets harder. The workout becomes harder. The diet becomes harder. The side business becomes harder. Not because they're difficult, because you don't believe you'll stick with them. Think about how many times you've said, this time is different. How many times? New year, new month, new Monday, new routine, new plan, new motivation. And every time you believed it, for a few days, maybe a week. Then life happened. Work got stressful. You got tired. Something came up. You missed one day, then another, and suddenly you were back where you started, again. Now imagine repeating that cycle for years. What happens? You stop trusting your excitement. You stop trusting your motivation. You stop trusting yourself. Not consciously, quietly, deep down, because your brain remembers.
Every promise, every failed restart, every unfinished plan, every abandoned goal. And eventually, it starts treating your future promises like noise, because history says they probably won't happen. That's why some people feel stuck even when they know exactly what to do. Knowledge isn't the problem. Trust is. They know what works. They know they should exercise, sleep earlier, eat better, spend less, read more, focus more, scroll less. They already know. The information isn't missing. The belief is.
They don't trust themselves to execute it anymore because they've rehearsed quitting more than they've rehearsed consistency. And that's what evenings are secretly doing. They're training your identity every single night, not toward the person you want to become, toward the person you repeatedly practice being. Why does the future version of you always seem so capable? Because future you doesn't exist. Future you never gets tired. Future you never gets distracted. Future you always wakes up early. Future you goes to the gym. Future you eats healthy. Future you handles everything. Future you is perfect. That's why your brain loves assigning responsibilities to them, because they aren't real. The problem is, eventually, tomorrow becomes today, and suddenly the responsibility belongs to you again, the real you, the tired version, the distracted version, the version sitting on the couch at 8:17 p.m. holding a phone. And now the fantasy disappears. Reality takes over, and reality feels heavier. So the task gets pushed forward again, to another imaginary version of yourself, another future, another Monday, another month, another year. That's why some people spend a decade waiting, not because they don't care, because they're addicted to potential. Potential feels good. Potential is safe. Potential never fails. Reality can. Action can. Trying can. So they stay in potential, forever planning, forever preparing, forever imagining, never becoming. Why does passive living feel comfortable at first, but painful later? Because comfort charges interest. That's the deal nobody talks about. Comfort feels free in the moment, but it sends you the bill later. The workout you skipped, the conversation you avoided, the opportunity you ignored, the evening you wasted, the years that passed. At first, it feels harmless. Then one day you wake up and realize you've been living the same month for 3 years. Same habits, same excuses, same patterns, same evenings, different dates. That's when it starts hurting, because now the consequences are visible. Now you can see what all those small decisions created or failed to create. And that's a difficult thing to face, because it means the problem was never bad luck, never timing, never a lack of information. It was repetition. What you repeatedly tolerated, what you repeatedly avoided, what you repeatedly chose. And that's uncomfortable, because it puts responsibility back in your hands. Not blame, responsibility. There's a difference. Blame looks backward. Responsibility looks forward. Blame asks, whose fault is this? Responsibility asks, what am I going to do about it? And evenings force that question, because evenings are where excuses run out. No boss, no manager, no deadlines, no external pressure. Just you and what you choose to do with your time. That's why evenings are so revealing. They're honest, painfully honest. They expose your priorities, not the priorities you talk about, the priorities you live. And sometimes those two things don't match. That's why people feel guilty at night, not because they're lazy, because they're aware of the gap between what they say matters and what they actually do, the gap between intention and action, the gap between potential and reality. And that gap gets heavier every year you ignore it, because eventually you stop wondering what your life could be and start realizing what it became. Why is this conversation uncomfortable? Because somewhere during this video, you stopped thinking about people in general and started thinking about yourself. Specific evenings, specific habits, specific promises, specific moments. The nights you said you'd start, the nights you didn't, the goals you postponed, the routines you abandoned, the messages you never answered, the projects you never finished, the version of yourself you keep talking about becoming. You know exactly what I'm talking about, because you've lived it. Most people don't need another productivity trick. They don't need another morning routine.
They don't need another motivational quote. They need honesty, brutal honesty, the kind that interrupts the pattern, because patterns survive in silence. They survive when you stop paying attention, when you normalize them, when you tell yourself, it's not a big deal. It's just tonight. Everyone does it. Maybe they do, but that doesn't change where it leads, because time doesn't care about your intentions, only your actions. The future doesn't care what you planned, only what you repeated. And repetition is powerful, more powerful than motivation, more powerful than inspiration, more powerful than goals. Because your life eventually becomes whatever you repeatedly do, not what you occasionally dream about, what you repeatedly practice. That's the truth hiding inside every evening, every ordinary Tuesday night, every random Thursday, every Sunday evening when you promise Monday will be different. Those moments don't feel important, but they are, because that's where your future is being built or neglected, one evening at a time. The scary part is that nothing dramatic happens when you waste an evening. No alarm goes off, no warning appears, no one calls you, no one tells you that you're drifting. Life just keeps moving, quietly, patiently, until years have passed. And now the consequences are visible. Now the habits have become a lifestyle.
Now the delays have become a personality. Now the excuses have become beliefs. And now you're looking at a life you didn't intentionally choose. You just slowly accepted it. That's what passive living does. Not one big decision, 1,000 small ones, 1,000 evenings, 1,000 moments where comfort won, 1,000 moments where tomorrow seemed close enough, until suddenly, tomorrow is gone, and all that's left is today. That's why this isn't really about evenings. It's about ownership. Ownership of your attention, ownership of your habits, ownership of your choices, ownership of your life. Because whether you admit it or not, you are practicing something every night. You are becoming something every night. The question is, what? Who are you becoming? Not who you want to become. Who are you actually becoming? Because those are often very different people. And deep down, you know which one you're feeding. You know which habits are winning. You know which promises keep getting broken. You know which conversations you're avoiding. You know which goals you've been carrying for years. You know. That's what makes this uncomfortable. Not because it's new information, because it's familiar. You've thought these thoughts before, usually late at night, usually after the scrolling stops, usually when the room gets quiet. And for a moment, everything becomes clear. The problem, the pattern, the truth. Then morning comes, life gets loud again, and the cycle continues. Unless it doesn't. Not because motivation finally arrived, not because inspiration struck, not because some magical version of you appeared, because you stopped pretending, because you finally looked at the pattern honestly, because you stopped calling it bad luck, stopped calling it a lack of time, stopped calling it stress, and started calling it what it is, a choice repeated often enough to become a life. And that's the part nobody can do for you. No video, no book, no podcast, no mentor. Because eventually, it comes back to the same moment. The moment after work, the moment you walk through the door, the moment you sit down, the moment you reach for your phone, the moment the evening begins. That's where the truth lives. Not in your plans, not in your intentions, not in your future. In that moment. Because that's where your life keeps changing direction, quietly, night after night, year after year. So tonight, when the evening starts, when nobody's watching, when the routine begins, when the excuses arrive, when comfort starts calling, pay attention. Because you've seen this movie before. You know exactly how it ends. The question isn't whether the pattern exists. The question is whether you're finally willing to see it. Because once you see it clearly, you lose the right to pretend you don't. And that's a heavy thing to carry. So be honest, not with me, with yourself. When you look at your evenings, what are they actually creating? And more importantly, what are they costing you? Be honest. Where are you still lying to yourself?